I wanted to do something a little bit different in today's recipe. This is going to be a combination of a couple of different recipes into one, and this is more of a bruschetta and an eggs benedict combined. We're going to be using wild mushrooms in this. This consists of enoki, king oyster and shiitake, and regular portobello mushrooms. You don't have to use the wild mushrooms if you don't want to, but they are quite easy and cheap to get. As for the other ingredients, we're going to need butter for our hollandaise, eggs as well for our hollandaise, and if you wanted to poach them, you can use them too. I'm obviously going to have some garlic and also some flat leaf parsley to make a nice garlic butter to go onto these, and I'm also using some regular sourdough just for the base. So let's get straight into it. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy. The first thing we want to do is remove the stems from 4 large portobello mushrooms, and with those stems, slice them into thin, even-sized strips. You don't have to do this and you can leave them on, but I find doing it this way helps everything balance onto the mushrooms, which you'll see later on, and these slices can be added to the other mushrooms. As for the other mushrooms, here is 3 shiitake mushrooms that can be thinly and evenly sliced, and do the same thing with 1 king oyster mushroom. I should also mention that these wild mushrooms came in a pack and it was a random mix weighing 250 grams or 8.8 ounces, so if you choose to use these it doesn't matter about the amount of each mushroom, just the combined weight. The regular oyster mushrooms can also be thinly sliced, removing any woody ends, and lastly remove the woody ends from the enoki mushrooms, all depending on the mushroom mix you have. Next is to prepare 3 grams or 0.1 ounces of flat leaf parsley, which can be scrunched into a tight bunch to make it easier to work with, and use a sharp knife to give it a rough chop. It doesn't need to be super fine, just as long as there's no large leaves or stems. It is being used in the garlic butter, so you can decide on how you like it. Run 2 cloves of freshly peeled garlic along a microplane or fine box grater to create a paste, and depending on how much you like garlic, you can use more or less, but trust me though, it's always better with more. With that done, add 2 tablespoons or 28 grams of unsalted butter that's extremely soft and almost melted to a bowl, following that up with the minced garlic, the roughly chopped flat leaf parsley, sea salt flakes to taste, and of course cracked black pepper. 10 cracks worth. Let's then give this all a really good mix using a spatula, ensuring everything is evenly combined, especially the garlic, so that it can infuse properly, leaving us with this delicious garlic butter, which is also perfect for garlic bread. Add in the portobello mushrooms one at a time and get these well coated all over, and it only needs to be a light coat, which will make sure there's enough garlic butter for the remaining 3 mushrooms. Once done, place them onto a baking tray lined with parchment paper, spreading them out evenly, and then transfer these over to a preheated oven set at 200 degrees Celsius or 390 degrees Fahrenheit on fan forced, and roast for 12 to 13 minutes. To make some clarified butter, place a small saucepan onto your stovetop and add in 300 grams or 10.5 ounces of unsalted butter, which mine decided not to come out of the bowl. Place this onto a medium heat and allow the butter to fully melt. Once melted, cook it for 4 minutes, which will allow for some of the milk solids to rise to the surface. Turn it off the heat and use a spoon to carefully scoop out as much of those solids as possible, trying your best not to remove the clear golden butter. The reason we do this is because when making hollandaise, we want this to be silky smooth, and the solids or milk solids can potentially split the hollandaise or cause it to be slightly clumpy, which is definitely not what we want. Once that's done to your best efforts, remove it from the stovetop and carefully pour the clarified butter into any heatproof container you may have, being sure to leave behind the solids, which will be sitting underneath the clarified butter. If you didn't know, this now has a higher smoke point as we've removed the milk solids, which is what makes butter burn easily, and this is not only great for hollandaise, it's also great for anything you like to cook in butter. With the milk solids left over, you can use this for popcorn and other things such as Indian breads, but it is okay to discard, just not down the sink. What we're then left with is this beautiful liquid gold clarified butter that can be stored in the fridge for up to 4 months, but for this recipe we want it to be fully melted and warm. You can also just cheat and use store-bought ghee, it's completely up to you. Now I'm going to show you how to make hollandaise 2 ways in this recipe, with the first being the traditional way using a bain-marie. For this, place 3 egg yolks into a heatproof mixing bowl along with 1 tablespoon or 20 milliliters of white vinegar or freshly squeezed lemon juice. Place a saucepan of water filled just under half onto a high heat and bring the water to a boil, and once boiling, turn the heat to low. Let's then place over the eggs and vinegar, creating a bain-marie or double boiler, but make sure the bowl is not directly touching the water, otherwise this will scramble. Now using a whisk, vigorously whisk this up until it forms thick ribbons. The way this works is we're using the heat from the saucepan to slowly heat the egg yolks. Naturally, egg proteins are long molecules that are curled up into a ball, and when you heat them, these proteins uncurl and form bonds with other proteins. When cooking eggs like this, we just want to heat it enough to cause the proteins to uncoil, but if we don't keep this moving, hence the vigorous whisking, the yolks will scramble and we will have to start this again. As for the vinegar or lemon juice, this adds a nice acidic touch to the flavour and also makes this unfriendly to bacteria growth, so there's no need to worry if you're concerned about consuming eggs. After about 2 minutes of whisking, your arm is sore and we have thick ribbons. This can be removed and turn the saucepan back onto a high heat, bringing it to a boil. Next, grab yourself a damp tea towel and shape it into a circle, to which we can then place in the bowl, and this will help stop the bowl from wobbling around too much. Now, whilst continuously whisking, very slowly pour in the clarified butter that we made before to create an emulsion, and this is what's going to make our hollandaise silky smooth. For this part, we do have to add the clarified butter in very slowly to help the bonds form together, and adding it too quickly will cause it to split. If you do happen to split this, it can be fixed easily by adding a splash of water, which will help things come back together. I also want to say that most recipes you see are quite particular on how much clarified butter you add, but this really does depend on the fat content within the yolks that are used. Some are more fatty, which will require less butter than others, but if you stick to 3 egg yolks to 300 grams or 10.5 ounces of clarified butter, you won't have any issues. You may also not need all of the butter, which can be used in other recipes. Once you've achieved a thick but pourable consistency, check and adjust seasoning levels with sea salt flakes and ground white pepper, then place over some cling wrap to prevent a skim from forming, and store this in a relatively warm area until ready to serve. Also, unfortunately, this sauce can't be stored. Another way to make hollandaise is in a blender or food processor using the same recipe, which is the 3 egg yolks to 1 tablespoon or 20 milliliters of white vinegar or freshly squeezed lemon juice. Make sure the lid is on tight, turn the machine onto high, and process this for 1 minute to slightly aerate the egg yolks. Next, with the same amount of clarified butter, which is 300 grams or 10.5 ounces, and you may not need it all, slowly pour it in the same way we did before, and make sure the butter is not boiling, but slightly hot. If you do have a blender or food processor, this way is a lot easier than busting your arm in the other method, as the hollandaise is consistently mixed, which in return makes this seriously silky smooth, but a little less aerated. Once enough clarified butter has been incorporated and the hollandaise is thick, remove that bowl from the stand and transfer that delicious silky smooth hollandaise into a bowl, or you can leave it in the blender bowl to save dishes. Once that's done, we're then left with this hollandaise sauce that has the perfect consistency and is not runny, which I unfortunately see too much these days. And just like before, place over some cling wrap to prevent a surface skin from forming, and pop this aside in a warmish area for the time being. Okay, with all of that done, place a pan over medium-high heat. Add in 1 tablespoon or 20 milliliters of olive oil or leftover clarified butter if you have any, and place in the sliced wild mushrooms, including those portobello stems. Just don't add in the enoki right now. This can then be sauteed for 4 to 5 minutes, not 45 minutes, just until golden brown, soft, and most of the retained moisture has evaporated. We can also hit it up with some sea salt flakes to taste and cracked black pepper, 10 cracks worth. Give the seasoning a good mix through and continue sauteing until golden and soft. Once that's achieved and you have something that looks like this, of course depending on the mushrooms you have used, add in the enoki mushrooms, spread them out from one another and continue sauteing until they are nice and soft and well mixed through, then remove this from the stovetop. With the double boiler we used earlier that's now a saucepan of boiling water, add in 2 teaspoons or 10 milliliters of white vinegar, which helps coagulate the eggs and form shape and create a vortex with a spoon that a lot of people will say is pointless, but I don't care because this is how I do it. With the water spinning, gently place in 4 whole eggs, or the amount of eggs you'd like, and poach these for 2.5 minutes. After 2.5 minutes, use a slotted spoon to get out those jiggly eggs, and place them onto some towel over a plate to drain the excess water, and we can also then remove the roasted garlic buttered mushrooms from the oven. Now lastly, we need some bread to toast, and I'm using a white sourdough, and I recommend 2 decent sized pieces per serving, but just do what you prefer. Drop these into a toaster or under the grill or broiler, whatever way you like it, toasting to your desired toastiness, and place these down onto a plate. Let's then drizzle over some extra virgin olive oil, which is optional, place over the soft and juicy garlic butter portobello mushrooms, top them with the poached eggs, to which I'm using 2 per serving, and then just top that all with the wild mushroom mix, gently laying it over the eggs and around the plate. We can then get saucy with the hollandaise, and there really isn't a right or wrong way to do this. Really just add as much as you want, it is absolutely delicious. You can however get some brownie points from whoever you're serving this to by creating a nice pattern around the plate with the sauce. Garnish this with some chopped flat leaf parsley for a pop of colour and freshness, also doing the same with some snow pea sprouts and cracked black pepper, using however much you want. With all of that done, we've just created this masterpiece, which is a mix of eggs benedict and bruschetta combined into one, and I was going to call it bruschetta dict, but I really didn't like how that sounded. Like always, we can then make this all worthwhile by cracking open these delicious soft eggs, and of course, we can then dig in.